Eric, I have the same fear that you have. The fear of public speaking, and you would think it would get better over the years, but so far it hasn't for me. I could never have imagined that I would ever be up here doing this years ago. Can you all hear me okay now? The message today, by the title you can tell, is going to focus on Jesus' trial. And that night, from the Garden of Gethsemane to when he was, they were going to crucify him. The three Gospels, Mark and John and Luke, and I've gone through them and put them in chronological order of the events that how they unfolded that night. You can read parts of it in all the different Gospels, but what I've tried to do is to have it so that we can follow through the whole evening's events, and that's what we're going to try to do tonight or today. So what you went through on our behalf, so that someday we might be with you in heaven. And it's only through your efforts that we'll ever be able to be there. And we thank you so much for that. And Father, I pray that we can better appreciate and get even just a small glimpse of what you went through that evening. Put that up there. Jesus had recently, like maybe a couple of weeks before, had raised Lazarus from the grave. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they couldn't take it anymore. So the raising of Lazarus was the final straw. So let's go ahead and read what we have here. Now I've highlighted some of the, when somebody is speaking, I put it in blue. So that's a quote. So hopefully it'll help us to follow it a little better. So this is from John 11:45 to 53. Now let me tell you that from Bethany to Jerusalem is just under 2 miles. So it's not very far. So Jesus had raised Lazarus, and then he goes into Jerusalem. And of course, that would have been Palm Sunday, riding the donkey. All up. So this is what it says here. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things that Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, "What shall we do for to take away both our place and the nation?" All right, that part there where it says the Romans will come and take away both our place and the nation. Now, Romans would speedily take care of any uprising or any attempt that would have occurred to put Jesus on the throne. The Romans would have already acted on this if they had any inkling that Jesus was here to set up an earthly kingdom. I mean, because the Romans knew what was going on. Let's see, verse 49. And one of them, Caiaphas, being the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for..." Now, he says they know nothing at all, nor do you consider. Now, Caiaphas, he's sly devil here. He's and what I'm sharing with you is what I've picked up from the Desire of Ages and the commentaries. This isn't my wonderful knowledge, so I'm just sharing it with you. Influence the group there, and he goes on to say, "Expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that for the whole nation should perish." Now, this comes from heathenism, that one man should die. You remember back studying history way back, and They would sacrifice people to gods. They would maybe bring a baby or a virgin or whoever they wanted to sacrifice. They did this in Mexico too. And they would sacrifice to a god who was portrayed as being an angry God, so we have to sacrifice one of our people so the rest of us can survive. Um, this is the thinking, the premise that he's got going here. All right, so now verse 51. Now this prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and that not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Now, what this was about, that he didn't speak of his own authority, the Holy Spirit influenced his words. Caiaphas had a hope that the nation would not perish and that would continue on, but that really didn't happen. Let's see, John 18, 12 and 14. Now, we pick up the story here about midnight or a little after. This is John 18, 12 through 14. Then a detachment of the troops and the captain of the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. Now, Jesus allowed himself to be bound. They wouldn't have bound him if he didn't allow it. Verse 13, and they led him away to Annas. Now, that doesn't mean they were elected from here. Now, it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that was expedient, you could say advantageous, that one man should die for the people. There we go again. Now, that Jesus would die for the people. Jesus was going to die for the people, but not just those people. He was going to die for everybody, not in sin, but to be free from sin. And Caiaphas was ready for him to die so that the nation could continue on in sin. But Jesus was going to die for a different reason. Does that make sense? All right. John 18, 19 through 24. Now, Jesus, Moses, or Abraham, almost like the voice of God. This was the guy that was the boss, the one had all the power. The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Now, what he's trying to do here is to find a reason for sedition. They want to try to find Jesus breaking some Roman law. And Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and the temples where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Now, Jesus did speak to people privately from time to time, but there was no sedition in it. And he certainly wasn't trying to cause an insurrection. But his main thrust of his teaching, it was always of his hands saying, do you answer the high priest like that? And Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now this is his son-in-law. So now he's going from Annas to Caiaphas. Now, it's getting later in the evening. I mean, it's past midnight. And they were searching for some Romans to do it. All right, verse 53. And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled the high priest. And he sat with the servants, and things were going pretty fast. And they weren't ready for this. And this evening, from midnight on, is starting to spin out of control in Peter's mind. Now the chief priests and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but none found. For many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witnesses against him, saying, We heard him say that I will destroy this temple and made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But not even did their influence to get upset with Jesus. And of course, we know in John 2:19, Jesus just said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up again. All right, now let's go to Mark 14, and in verse 60. And the high priest stood up and in the midst, but he kept silent and answered nothing. You know, Isaiah 53 said, like a lamb to the slaughter, and never made a sound. The priest asked him, saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus says, I am. And you will see the Son. Said, What further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? Okay, hang on just a minute. It's like, oh my Lord, this is awful. And he rips his clothes off. This is terrible. And he's trying to influence. It says the priests are not to tear their clothes under penalty of death. So he condemned himself there doing that. So let's go on now and read a little more there. He goes on and says, You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And then they all condemned him to be deserving of death. And then some began to spit on him, to blindfold and to beat him, and say to him, Prophesy. And the officers struck him with the palms of their hands. Verses 1 through 12 here. Actually, verse 23, and 1 through 12. Okay, then the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate. So they all headed to Pilate, Sanhedrin, the priests, the rulers, the mob. The Jews couldn't enter the Roman judgment hall. The multitude led him to Pilate. And now, this is in the middle of the night, and I doubt Pilate's too thrilled. This fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. Now, they were trying to show that Jesus was working against the Roman law, and he should be punished as a political offender. He, in a very short period of time with Jesus, realized he was a good man, and there was nothing, not paying taxes to Caesar. He said it in Luke 20, and pay tribute to the picture on the coin. In bed, he wanted this over quickly, and he took Jesus aside. Then in verse 3, then Pilate asked him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him and said, It is as you say. Now, right here, Pilate could have released Jesus. But Pilate was kind of weak, and he was afraid of the Jews. He was afraid of his bosses and the Roman government. But if he would have stood firm right then and there and said, I'm not going to take care of this. Now, it does say that if Pilate would have released Jesus, Jesus would have been crucified anyhow, because the mob would have taken care of it, because they were really getting out of control as this evening went along. So John 18, we're back to John again. And Pilate had asked, Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered him and said, Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me? And Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. So, see, no sedition there. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, Are you a king then? And Jesus answered, You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my words. In verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in them." All right, verse Luke 23. So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." Now, see, this is a little bit more in a different Bible book. So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no fault in this man." But they were more fierce, saying, "He stirs up people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place." And we continue on here. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now, Herod was probably in Jerusalem because of the Passover. And apparently, Pilate and Herod were needing to make little reprimands, and Pilate wanted to get, kind of gain some traction with Herod a little bit, kind of patch things up. So Pilate thought this was a good opportunity to heal an old quarrel. So now, verse 8. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him and hoped to see some miracle done by him. Now, this is the Herod that had John the Baptist beheaded. And it was about a year and a half before this. So it wasn't all that long before. And Herod also, at this time, was living in adultery. And he wanted to see some miracle. He had maimed and decrepit people brought in, maybe demon-possessed or whatever. They were not right people. He had them brought in, and it was almost going to be like a show here, and Jesus wasn't going to do that. Then he questioned him in verse 9. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. They were very loud, very angry. And then Herod, verse 11, then Herod with his men of war treated him with contempt. And the crowd started to act like a wild beast, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him with a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's possible that this robe they put on Jesus might have been one of Herod's old robes. Can you imagine the awfulness of that? After they're already treating Jesus horrible, and then throw Herod's old robe on. All right, verse 12. At that very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. So they made friends over the trial of Jesus. They were irritated by Jesus' silence. It seemed to indicate to Herod that he had utter and complete disregard for Herod and his authority. But the truth was, Herod had rejected the truth spoken to him by the greatest prophet, one of the greatest prophets, John the Baptist. Not a single word did heaven have for this man now. It's over for Herod. Herod's face grew full of passion and blood red at his anger at Jesus. And what's waiting outside? The mob. All right, Luke 23. Now this goes back from Herod to Pilate again. So then Jesus goes back over to Pilate, and Pilate, when he, verse 13, had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as you who were misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him, In your presence I have found no fault in this man concerning those things which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent him back to him. Better translation might be, no, neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. So Herod, he was saying, I sent him to Herod. He found no fault in him. Now he's sending him back to us. And of course, Pilate's trying to influence people. He doesn't want to do this. And indeed, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. Verse 16, I will therefore chastise him. That's flogging. And this often results in death. It's really severe. He was hoping that he could whet their thirst for the blood that they were wanting by flogging Jesus. And it was an awful affair. Matter of fact, many people died during it. Verse 16, I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. All right. Verse 39, but you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Then they all cried again, saying, no, or not this man, but Barabbas. And Barabbas was a robber. Now we go to John 19. And we continue on with this evening. So Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. This was the second time. First time could have killed someone. Now this is the second time. The first time he was trying to encourage compassion. This time, no, not so much. So Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put it on him a purple robe. And they said to him, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Pilate hoped that this would satisfy the Jewish leaders when he brought Jesus out. He'd been flogged now for the second time, was beaten really bad, 2 floggings, and he stood before the multitude. Here's the man. This is the guy you brought me. He's done nothing wrong. Now, are you satisfied? I mean, that was kind of the intent, okay? Verse 6, Therefore when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. Now, the Jews would normally have stoned someone. The Romans were the ones that did the crucifying. But Pilate was putting this on to the Jews. And Jesus answered him, the Jews answered him, We have a law that according to our law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. Verse 8, Therefore when Pilate heard that saying, he was more afraid and went again into the praetorium, as the judgment hall, and said to Jesus, Where are you from? Now, he already knew where Jesus was from, but he's beginning to get mentally concerned and shook up that there's something about this man that he ought not be involved with, that maybe he is divine. Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Are you not speaking to me? Then he was silent before Caiaphas and Herod. This is the third time Jesus has not spoken. Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and the power to release you? And Jesus answered, You have no power You could have no power at all against me unless it has been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who delivers me to you has the greater sin. And that one that he's talking about there is Caiaphas and not Judas. Now, if you remember back, Pilate's wife, she understood that of Jesus' character. She knew him to be a prince of God, and she had a dream and it said, have nothing to do with this man. So this is floating around in Pilate's brain as he's dealing with this situation. And here Jesus is not really saying anything to him at this point. Pilate, and like the others, have had ample time. 3.5 years. Okay, verse 12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him. He was afraid of who Jesus was. But the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's. You are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. So they're threatening Pilate. Pilate's already afraid of his bosses, and now they're threatening him. So you're not a friend of Caesar's, and we're going to let people know about it. That type of deal. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and set him down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement. It's probably marble. In the Hebrew, Gabbatha. They believe that is an elevated place, but that's about all I can tell you about it. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and I believe that was around to 9 o'clock in the morning. The Romans, they believed that this 6th hour was a Roman time rather than the way the Jews calculated time. That's the best I could get about it. With him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answered and said, we have no authority to Caesar. And then he delivered them to be crucified. Then they took Jesus and led him away. Went on the cross about 9 in the morning, approximately, and died at around 3 in the afternoon, I believe. But you can see that evening of what went on. It seemed that everybody was in a state of confusion or turmoil except Jesus. Jesus was the only calm one there. He was determined and resolute to finish this mission for you and me. I'll share with you Christ's object lesson on to prepare. And better than all the words of earthly praise will be the Savior's words to his faithful servant. Come ye, blessed of my Father. Well, that's what Jesus went through before he was crucified. And he didn't do that for himself. He did it for us. And I hope that kind of makes a little more sense of that evening. Back and forth, all the time being beaten and spit on and flogged. That was all before the cross. So it was an awful evening.